Austin Meek, you just covered Michigan's spring game. This is a situation where I always like the teams that are in a very healthy position, and you can tell by their spring game, because you might see a token appearance from a starter, like a big star, and then they're done. And it's just guys that you've heard about in recruiting. Like, that's a healthy program, and that's what Michigan's spring game was.
Yeah, it was J.J. McCarthy and a bunch of guys that you probably hadn't heard of unless you follow recruiting really closely. And that's, like you said, like that's the position you want to be in. Michigan as a program right now is in a spot where they can basically use the spring as like a developmental period for like the bottom half of their roster, bottom 2/3 of their roster. Let your starters get healthy, give them a light workload in the spring. And then, for Michigan, it's basically down to like a couple spots, like a couple starting jobs that are going to be up for grabs, a couple guys that we got to see in that game who might be on the field as starters when Michigan opens the season. But really, it's just a lot of roster development, a lot of those young players who maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, you'll see them in the starting lineup. But right now, they're just trying to get some experience.
Austin, how good can Michigan be next year? Like when you look at what's coming back, the important transfers that they brought in after last year, like, is this a team that should be favored to win the Big Ten and can win a playoff game in your mind?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, I think Michigan has established itself right now as the team to beat in the Big Ten. Ohio State's going to have a new quarterback. I would pick Michigan right now to win the Big Ten. I think Michigan is capable of winning a national championship. It's hard for me to predict that until they win a game in the playoff. I haven't really dug in closely to see what Georgia's got coming back, or Alabama, or, the teams that they're going to be competing with. But I think that this sets up to be Michigan's best chance to win a national championship since their last one in '97. I think they have the team to do it.
What amazes me about this, Austin, we're less than 3 years removed from it feeling like the wheels were coming off. Like all of this was going to be a complete disaster. Meanwhile, in the past couple of years, that they've lost a defensive coordinator, they've lost an offensive coordinator. The co-OC quarterbacks coach has been fired in the offseason. Jim Harbaugh has flirted with the NFL twice, and it feels like they are stronger than ever.
Yeah. Yeah, something happened with that program in that offseason after the COVID year where they just flipped a switch, and ever since then it's like everything they touch turns to gold pretty much. It's to me, it's one of the craziest turnarounds I've personally seen up close in my time covering college football, just because the mood, like, you kind of had to be here, but the mood after that 2020 season was just so bleak here. It's like Jim Harbaugh is never going to live up to what people wanted him to be. It's a failure. It's like, this just crushing disappointment for Michigan to be in this place. And then somehow it's like in the span of an offseason, they just flipped it, and they've been on a tear ever since. And it looks like it's just going to keep going. I mean, there was a point in time where people thought, like, maybe this is going to be like kind of a 2-year flash in the pan because their recruiting has been a little bit down. But now the last month they've had this run of commitments, and it's like they're just loading up again. And they could be even better a couple years from now. So it's been a really crazy transformation that they've made.
Yeah, no, I actually thought, that after was the first year they beat Ohio State 21, right? Mm-hmm. That was like the perfect storm for them, and that they, everything seemed to line up, and that would be a one-off because of just the stark differences in recruiting. And then Michigan came back last year and beat the crap out of Ohio State in Ohio Stadium again. And now they're returning the majority of their team. And what I think is interesting is I believe, like, if I'm picking the Big Ten champion going into this year, I'm picking Michigan. You know what I mean? Like, there's no reason why you wouldn't, considering all the things you just outlined there. But my number one thing, and we talked about this, Austin, on Stars Matter a few weeks ago, was, can Michigan finally use what they've done on the field to translate into recruiting wins? And since we last spoke, got a few. They went into Ohio and got a top 100 player. And then, of course, have you heard of this guy's name that they got, that quarterback? What? You heard of this
Davis,
guy? Jalen Davis, is that his? Oh, Jaden Davis. Yeah, the 5-star kid they've been recruiting for over a year.
Forever. Yeah.
There was some worry about whether or not that was kind of, starting to slip away because he kept pushing his recruitment back. But he came and visited. He met Sharon, right? Was that for the first time in person?
The new quarterbacks coach. Yeah, that was the first chance they'd had to meet in person. Yeah.
In Austin, they closed. Like, what does the last month in recruiting mean in terms of your faith in the longevity of the run they're having right now?
I mean, the 2024 recruiting class I thought was absolutely crucial for Michigan in terms of setting the foundation for what the next wave of Michigan football is going to be. Because right now they have this group of stars, had a bunch of guys come back. Blake Corum came back, Trevor Keegan, Zach Zinner, all these guys who came back basically for one more run at a national championship. And it's like, okay, are they putting all the eggs in this basket to win it all in 2023 and then see what happens after that? Or are they actually building something that could be sustainable? And this was a really big recruiting cycle for Michigan to stock up on the next wave of players. And so far they really have. I mean, this month of March has been, I have to look back, but I think it's kind of unprecedented for Michigan in the time that Jim Harbaugh has been here. Typically, Michigan has been a team that has finished really strong in recruiting. And a team that has started a little bit slow. So for Michigan to be where they are, they're in the top 5 right now. Jaden Davis, a 5-star player. Jordan Marshall, a running back out of Ohio. This start for Michigan is something that we haven't really seen lately. And I think it really, it really raises the ceiling for what this class could be, which then also raises the ceiling for what you think Michigan could be as a program. Like, are they getting ready to recruit at the level of Ohio State or Georgia?
I don't know the reason why they wouldn't be. I don't know, like, why. Yeah. That's been my number one thing for the past
they're winning the
10
Big
years.
10. Like, there's no reason they there's no reason they can't be in that mix. Hey, Austin, I'm curious, how much credit does Sharon Moore get for not just the on-field stuff, the offensive line play, the offense in general, but the recruiting part of it? It seems like he's a guy you hear recruits talk about quite a bit.
Yeah, he probably doesn't get as much credit as he deserves even, but he's really been the constant with this program, him and a couple other guys. I mean, this staff basically has changed over completely from 2020, aside from, Jay Harbaugh's been around and Sharon Moore's been here, and otherwise it's a lot of new faces. But Sharon Moore's really, I think, especially on the offensive side, the guy who has really kind of carried through the ups and downs of the last 5 years at Michigan, and come out as the guy who's now the leader of that staff on the offensive side. I mean, he really cut his teeth coaching the offensive line. They've, back-to-back Joe Moore Award winners, have been one of the best offensive lines in college football the last couple of years, and now Sharon Moore, he's got a lot on his plate, as the play caller and the offensive line coach, and a really big piece of the puzzle in recruiting. But he's shown he can handle that. I mean, I think he's been as valuable as anybody at Michigan over the last 5 years in terms of the turnaround that this program's had.
So let's talk about some of these players, because one of the things.
Well, hey, Andy, I don't mean to interrupt you, but there's one other thing I wanted to ask him before we go into the current team.
Yeah.
So I covered JJ McCarthy's recruitment. Yeah, I don't think you were on the beat yet at that point. God, we're getting old. Were you on the beat?
So one of my first stories was I went to Nazareth and talked to JJ, like his senior year there.
Yeah. So like when I went there, it was right after he committed, and he said that he didn't like the way that Ohio State treated him, because there was some. If you go back and read the story, he like vowed that he would be the guy that led Michigan to the promised land. And I don't know how much credit he gets because Cade McNamara won the first one, but he is the quarterback now as we're having this conversation about Michigan's placement. So there's no question that JJ McCarthy was an influential program changing commitment. But from a football talent standpoint, not that he isn't good and not that JJ isn't going to be a pro one day, but what do you see out of Jaden Davis on the film or what you've read about him? Is this a level up in terms of the type of talent they're bringing in at that position? Like, is this even more influential, you think, from what they can expect on the field?
Well, I think Jaden Davis has been probably an a known commodity as a recruit, longer than JJ was. I mean, Jaden Davis as an 8th grader was a big time recruit. Like Alabama, I think, offered him as an 8th grader. He was the number 1 player in the class, I think, as a sophomore. So he's just like been in the spotlight the whole time. And so I personally think that's one of the reasons why he could be really good at Michigan, because in order to succeed at Michigan at quarterback playing for Jim Harbaugh, like, you have to be really, really mentally tough. And we've seen some players who like came in here and it was really hard for them in that spotlight with all the pressure of playing quarterback at Michigan. And so I think Jaden Davis could be really, really good in that respect. I mean, I think he just has everything that you want. I mean, you watch his film and like he makes all the throws. He makes off-platform throws. I mean, the creativity, the arm. There's not necessarily like one thing that jumps out at you, that like one trait he has that's above all the others, but he's just a really, really solid quarterback who checks all the boxes. His maturity, his mechanics, like it's just all there. And so, I certainly think he's the type of player who could maintain the level that they're at right now with JJ McCarthy, or even take it a step further. I mean, I think Michigan as a program is probably going to be a better program for Jaden Davis coming into it than Michigan as a program was for JJ McCarthy when he came in as a freshman. So I think the combination of the player and then the pieces around him, certainly you'd think he, if not maintain it, can even maybe take it to another level.
Andy, what do they think about JJ McCarthy on Prospects to Pros? Have you guys had that discussion?
I'm glad you asked that, because yes, I do host a podcast called Prospects to Pros on the Athletic Football Show feed with Dane Brugler and Lance Zerline. Dane loves JJ McCarthy. Loves him. He thinks he could be one of the bigger prospects in the 2024 quarterback class, which, as you know, already is probably going to include Caleb Williams and Drake May. So
yeah, I wasn't sure if he was a first rounder or not, which is why I asked him that question.
Well, they like
that question.
Yeah. Dane likes the tools a lot. Now, I will say, if JJ's really good next year, there may be a discussion to be had, and if you think you might be number 1, like you will want to look at the 2025 draft class, because if you're really good and you think you could be one of the best quarterbacks in a class,
you might consider coming back.
You may not want to be in the same class as Caleb Williams and Drake May. Like, you may want to be in the next class. Yeah. And so that's something interesting to watch, because I don't know about Austin. You tell me. It felt like they didn't put a lot on JJ until the Ohio State game, but when he needed to carry the offense against Ohio State, he could. And I'm excited to see a season where we know that's available to them.
Yeah. I mean, Sharon Moore said that the other day, that there's going to be games this season where JJ doesn't throw it very much, and people are going to be mad about that, because it's like, you've got this quarterback who could be a first round pick. Like, let him throw. I mean, they've got Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards, and I think they look at it like, we don't need to reinvent who we are. Mm-hmm. We just need to be the team that we've been the last 2 years, that wants to go out there and run the ball down your throat. And then we have a quarterback who, oh, by the way, is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in college football, at least from a evaluation standpoint. His numbers may not say that. I don't think he's going to put up he's probably not going to put up Heisman numbers at Michigan. Like, that's one thing that why maybe it's hard to recruit quarterbacks to Michigan sometimes, is like, this is not an offense where you come in as a quarterback and know that you're going to throw it 35 times a game. But when they needed to do that in the Fiesta Bowl and against Ohio State, like, JJ McCarthy has that in his game, and I do think they need to open that up a little bit more this season.
So let's talk about some of the guys that you saw in the spring game. And there's a lot of the better players didn't play a lot. The offensive line, we kind of know where it's at now. Ladarius Henderson is coming from Arizona State as a transfer. He's going to slot in somewhere there. But offensively, who's kind of next? Who do we not know about now, who we will be talking about in October, November?
Yeah, one guy, we didn't get a chance to see him in the spring game. He didn't play in the spring game, but we'd heard some good stuff about him in the spring, was Tyler Morris, wide receiver. He was actually a teammate of J.J. McCarthy's at Nazareth Academy. Michigan has to replace Ronnie Bell, which is one of the more significant losses for a team that didn't have a lot to replace. So I personally think Tyler Morris could end up playing a pretty big role on this team. Darius Clemens is another young receiver that we haven't had a chance to see a lot from, but was a talented kid, a top 100 type kid that just is kind of waiting for an opportunity. And then, some of the young running backs, probably the biggest surprise of the spring game for Michigan was a guy named Benjamin Hall, running back, who, when he signed with Michigan, is one of those players where it's like, why is he at Michigan? He was like 750 or something in the composite rankings. Didn't have a great senior year at his high school, and there was like some question about if he should be at Michigan, frankly. And then he came out in the spring game and ran for almost 100 yards, and people have talked about him potentially being able to be in the rotation as a freshman. So that offense is so loaded that there's not going to be room for a lot of young players to step in and have significant roles. But I think we could see a couple maybe come in and complement the talent that Michigan has coming back on its offense.